Hello, I'm Bob Mayer, and welcome to my channel on YouTube for survival. This one is Special Forces Survival Hacks. These are just things I've gathered out from my Preparation Survival Guide, my area study workbook, and my experiences that I think are just neat to know. I go into all of these in much more detail in my books, but here's just a scattershot of different observations. First thing is, why do you even prepare? Well, you prepare for three reasons. One is to avoid the emergency, which makes sense. The second is to have a plan, equipment, and training in place in case you actually have the emergency. But the third one is one people don't think about much, but it's really important. It's for peace of mind. I think anybody who's reasonably cognizant of what's going on in the world realizes there is the potential for disaster. And they worry about it, but they don't do anything about it. If you are prepared, you don't spend as much time worrying and your quality of life improves. Why else? 53% of people don't have a 3-day supply of water. I mean, do you? 52% of families don't have an emergency rally point. I'll explain what that is in a short amount of time. 48% of people don't have emergency supplies. What do you have? 44% of households have no first aid kit. I mean, you might have some Band-Aids somewhere or this or that, but do you have a first aid kit? Beyond that, do you have, a blood kit, tourniquet, quick clot bandages, all of that? 42% of people don't know the phone numbers of immediate family members. That's an interesting one. Think about it. If you don't have your cell phone and you have to use someone else's or a landline or tell someone to call for you, do you know the phone number that needs to be called? 80% of Americans live in a county that's been hit by a weather-related disaster since 2007. That's 4 out of 5. 60% of people haven't practiced or prepared for what to do in an emergency. 55% of people think they can rely on the, quote, authorities to rescue them. And usually you can, except what happens when it's really widespread. I mean, you always see people coming in from the outside. I just saw on Twitter firefighters coming in from South Africa to Canada to help them fight a wildfire. But what if what if the whole world has problems and you can't count on anybody outside your local area to help you? So what do? The first thing you do, this is the first thing in my book, task number 1 in the Preparation Survival, excuse me, it's buy 2 cases of water for every person in your household. 2 cases of water will last you 6 days. I mean, and that's pretty much will get you through most what I call mild or medium emergencies, okay? A case of bottled water will last for 3 days, so 2 cases, 6 days. I recommend more than that. I recommend getting a water filter. I go into this extensively in the preparation guide. This one I've always done. I didn't think about it much, but then Atlanta had that big ice storm several years ago, and a lot of people had to abandon their cars, and they're trying to walk home in their business shoes or high heels or whatever. It's just a real smart thing to keep a pair of boots or workout shoes, at the very least running shoes, in your car and truck, just in case you get stranded and you have to walk. Water weighs 8.34 pounds per gallon. You ask, well, why is that important? Well, first off, if you're carrying water, it's really important. And in certain places, you're going to end up carrying water. But water is powerful. I commanded a scout swim team in Special Forces, and we went to Royal Danish Navy Frogman School for surf combat swim. Boy, water can push you around. Moving water is very dangerous. Water velocity times 2 equals water force times 4. What that means, if you double the velocity of the water, it becomes 4 times more powerful. 6 inches of moving water will knock you over. 12 inches can sweep away a car. People don't believe that. They rush. You always see those idiots who drive into that flooded road and get stuck. But what's worse is when the car gets pushed away. Water is critical for functioning. Most people are chronically dehydrated. 5% drop is a 25% drop in energy level. 15% drop will cause death. I'm a big fan of having water bottles everywhere and just constantly drinking water. On the flip side, most water in nature is unsafe to drink. Assume it is. That's why I'm big on water filters. I cover water filters and what type to get in my presentation, my YouTube channel presentation on water. And I also, at the end, you'll see I have a way you can easily find the links to all the stuff I talk about, all the gear, all the free apps. To purify water, the rule is to boil it for 1 minute at sea level, add a minute for every 1,000 feet above sea level. Venomous snakes, I bring this up because people talk about it. My wife's terrified of snakes. Usually have a triangular head, while non-venomous have more spoon-shaped heads. The threat of snakes is greatly overblown, but it's there. I mean, the odds are you're not going to end up getting bit by a snake. I throw this up here just because a lot of people don't know what's around them. Do you have nuclear power plants near you? Just something to be aware of. I have an area study workbook where I talk about studying the area where you live in terms of threats and assets. Well, a nuclear power plant could be a threat. And just because you're out west doesn't mean you're okay, because there's nuclear missile silos. Also, I always used to notice in the Washington, Oregon area, all those white vans transporting material because, up the river there in Washington and Oregon and into Washington, you've got part of what was we've got Oak Ridge here in Tennessee. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the name of the place up there where that was part of that program. Murphy's Law, what can screw up will. My first platoon sergeant, Vietnam vet, told me an interesting thing. People don't look up. In Hunger Games, you saw that the little girl who hid up in the tree. I just throw that out there because a lot of people just don't look up. When I attended international mountain climbing school, the mountaineer told us that most people die on the way down the mountain. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of which is, the adrenaline's not pumping anymore. You reach the peak, you're not as cautious as you were. But another thing, though, is your head's on top of your body. Think about that, not down on your feet. So when you're going down, it's further away from where you're looking at. But the other reason is people don't look back. This is one thing I do when I'm hiking a trail or even driving sometimes out in the desert. I look back and I try to get an idea of what it's going to look like when I'm going the other way. Flood watch means a flood is possible. Flood warning means the flood is happening. Big difference. This is important, especially in winter. As you go up in elevation, the temperature drops. When we lived in Boulder, Colorado. You drove from Denver down to Colorado Springs. On the way down there, you go up in elevation. And what would happen in the winter is there'd be no ice on the road in Denver, and there's no ice on the road in Colorado Springs. But when you hit that elevation, going up about 1,500, 2,000 feet between the two of them, you hit ice. It's the same thing to think about when camping. Even the Smokies. It's a big difference between being at 2,000 feet and 5,000 feet. Do not drink the following. I know you hear all these myths and legends about people who've done this and survived. That's survivor bias, which I'll talk about shortly. Seawater you use up more of your water drinking, processing the seawater. Sea ice, I've had people argue with me about, and they are correct. There is sea ice that doesn't have water in it. I'm not going to get into it because if you're in that extreme environment, I would hope you at least have done an area study before you get that and you understand the difference. Blood is not a substitute for water. It is a food, okay? I mean, if you're a vampire, okay, but for the rest of us, it's a food, so you need water to process it. Urine, your body's getting rid of it for a reason. Why would you put it back in there? It's 2% salt, which needs water to process it. And unlike the movies where everybody just takes a shot of something to fortify themselves, alcohol dehydrates you, and it also clouds your judgment. It's not the thing to be drinking in a survival situation. This is just a tidbit for those of you who travel in the desert. We underestimate by a factor of 3 how far away something is. My team sergeant, this was one of his favorite sayings, nothing is impossible to the man who doesn't have to do it. Yeah, it's always easy to tell someone else how to do something. In emergency, a text message has a much better chance of getting through. Like 9/11, people, when the systems were overloaded, if you try to text, you had a better chance of getting through than a voice call. I mentioned IRP, immediate rally point. That's someplace near your house, near your work, and where your school or wherever, where if something happens inside, it's outside where everybody who's there will gather together so you know who's who. Okay, a light post outside your house, wherever, a corner, pretty close to it. ERP is emergency rally point. It's a bit further out. If people are coming from different places, like you have to assemble an emergency, somebody's at home, somebody's at work, somebody's at school, and you have to get together. That's what your ERP is for. I describe these in detail in both the workbook and the preparation guide. And I even talk about the bug out hide site, which I'm not going to get into here. Your triage priority, breathing, bleeding, broken. That's the order in which you look at somebody who's injured. The rule of 3, that's why the triage is in this order. 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. So always, water is much higher priority than food. 550 cord, parachute cord is very useful. In Ranger School, they call them dummy cords because you tie everything off to yourself. Anything that's not tied off to yourself, and if you're just going hiking, you're going to lose it. And when you cut the 550 cord, use a lighter to melt the cut ends to keep them from unraveling. This is a big one. This is actually might have saved my life. I saw on Twitter someone said that some friends of theirs drowned the previous week, and they hadn't been wearing their life vests. And I thought about that because on kayaking, I always toss my life vest behind the seat because I figured, oh, it's there. I can grab it if I need it. And I thought about it, and I realized, no, I'm not going to be able to grab it because the very nature of an accident means I don't know what's going to happen. It's the equivalent of a seatbelt in a car. Having the seatbelt there doesn't help you. So you go, oh, look, I'm going to get in an accident. I'm going to put my seatbelt on. You may feel like a doofus. You may look different than other people who are just out there partying. Always wear your life vest on the water. I mean, if you get knocked unconscious and when you fall off the boat, having it handy is not going to help you. Yeah, shortcuts are rarely ever short and can be deadly. I know several survival stories where the people didn't survive. I do the Donna party. I've got that story for free, actually, on my website in detail, how their shortcut was not a shortcut. Okay, there was a family that was traveling through the mountains in California to get to the coast, and they took what they thought was a shortcut, and the father of the family ended up dying. What do you do if you get lost? Use the acronym STOP, and the S stands for stop. Don't keep moving. The moment you realize you're lost, don't keep going because you're just going to make it worse, okay? Then think, how'd you get here? What do you remember? Remember looking back? Do not move until you have a plan to move. Otherwise, stay where you're at. Observe, get oriented. Which way is north? Have all these things on how to tell which directions in the preparation guide. If you're on a trail or road, stay on it. Don't cut cross country. They're built to take it. Roads and trails are built to take advantage of the easiest route, and it's the most likely place you're going to run into somebody else. Plan before you do anything. Make sure your plan. Think it through. Are there other options? If you are not confident in your plan, stay in place. I've always had Jeeps, and I do a lot of boondocking out in the boonies. Good traction. I end up, when I hit a forest rotor, I deflate 25%. To keep getting a blowout, basically, and it gives me more traction on rough dirt roads, washboards, and moderate trails. Slick rock and big rocks, 30 to 35%. I went to the Outer Banks recently. You can drive on the beach there. You can get a permit. I ended up deflating 50% to drive on that beach because it was a little bit tough. So, of course, I always carry a air pump. I got one that hooks right up to the battery. It can reinflate my tires pretty quick. But even if you have to go a little on hardball a bit with deflated tires, you can get to a gas station and reinflate. If you begin hydroplaning, which my wife and I talk about often because we did this on I-70 in Kansas, it's like being on ice. Do not slam on the brakes. Take your foot off the gas and pump the brakes. Turn it in the direction of the slide. An average adult has about 1.2 to 1.5 gallons, 5 or 6 quarts of blood in them. So if you lose 1 quart, you'll start to go into shock. Shock is what really kills a lot of people. 2 quarts, severe shock. 3 quarts usually results in dead. Remember, breathing, bleeding, broken. Getting wet was something we were really careful not to happen during winter warfare. I was in 10th group. We did winter warfare training because you lose heat 25 times faster when you wet. When you think about being wet, one of the things was not sweating. I would literally give time hacks before we picked up our rucks and threw them on. So guys could strip down, take their coats off, take their shirts off, get down to just their t-shirt or undershirt, polyprop undershirt. So we're freezing when we start out skiing with our heavy rucksacks and our weapons and our gear. But after about a couple minutes, we warm up and we don't want to sweat. This is survivor bias. Okay, what they were doing was when planes made it back from the missions, they looked where it was all shot, the planes were shot up and go, oh. Their first initial thought was reinforce those areas that got shut up. But then someone realized, well, wait, these planes made it back. The ones that aren't making it back are shot in the places that these ones aren't shot at. This is reverse thinking. This is something that can be very helpful in a lot of different areas of life. And the last thing here, survival hack, is the infamous acronym survival. I have a whole YouTube presentation on this, what each of the letters mean for. If you remember them, they can help you in any survival situation. Size up the situation, use all your senses. Don't be in a rush unless you absolutely have to be in a rush. Remember where you are. Vanquish fear and panic. Don't be running around like the guy in Aliens. We're all going to die. We're all going to die. Improvise. You can use things differently than they were made for. Value living. That's the absolute most important thing. That will keep you alive more than anything else. Act like the natives. They've been there. Even the animals and the birds. What are they doing to survive? And live by your wits. I hope you found these useful. This is the links. If you go to my website, you hit that red box. There's a Word doc there with links directly to free apps for survival, web pages, and all the gear I talk about on there. These are my books. The workbook is for you to examine your area. People have really enjoyed doing this. I actually do consulting on this with people to do an area study where they live. The Prep and Survival Guide has all this stuff I've covered. The camouflage one at the bottom is just the survival portion of the Prep and Survival Guide, but it's pocket size. You can put it in your glove compartment, in your grab-and-go bag, your kitchen, whatever. It's got first aid in it. My little black books, this is where I'm at right now. I plan on having a whole bunch of them. They're just fun to write, full of information, trivia, and also useful stuff in there, like the New York one, how to read a subway map. Even native New Yorkers don't know how to do that. This is my background, and I would ask you to please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you go to my website, if you just sign up for my newsletter, I only send it out once a month. I always have new free books on my newsletter that I send out every month, and that's my background. Please stay safe out there, and all the best.